The sun beat down on the deck of the Serenity, but for Damien Blackwood, a chill was about to set in that had nothing to do with the sea breeze. He held a flute of champagne, the crystal cool against his skin, a perfect counterpoint to the warmth of his mistress, Chloe, nestled against his side. This yacht, this trip, this woman, they were all trophies, symbols of a life he had built by being smarter, faster, and more ruthless than anyone else. He was a king in his floating castle, untouchable. But some castles are built on foundations of sand, and the tide was about to turn. In a few moments, the uniformed captain would approach, and with a single respectful gesture, he would detonate the perfectly curated lie that was Damien's life. The Aegean Sea glittered like a carpet of crushed sapphires under the midday sun. Damien Blackwood adjusted his designer sunglasses, a smirk playing on his lips. Everything was perfect. The yacht, the Serenity, was a 150-foot masterpiece of engineering and luxury, slicing through the waves with a quiet hum that spoke of immense power held in reserve. It was his for the week, a casual expense that would have been a lifetime savings for most men. Beside him, Chloe Decker sighed in contentment, her blonde hair fanning out over the plush sun lounger. "I can't believe this is real, Dee," she murmured, her voice a breathy purr. "It's like a dream." Damien took a slow sip of his champagne, a vintage 2008 Cristal. "It's not a dream, sweetheart. It's my life. And for this week, it's yours, too." Chloe was 24, an Instagram model with wide, ambitious eyes and a body that had been sculpted by equal parts genetics and discipline. She was the perfect accessory for a man like Damien. She was beautiful, adoring, and most importantly, she wasn't complicated. She didn't ask about his work, his past, or the faint, almost invisible band of lighter skin on his left ring finger, where a wedding band usually sat. He had told her it was from a family signet ring he'd recently had resized. She'd accepted it without a second thought. His wife, Isabella, was the opposite of Chloe. She was complicated. Isabella was quiet, thoughtful, and came from old money that whispered while Damien's new money screamed. They had met at a charity gala, and he'd been drawn to her understated elegance and the sharp intelligence in her dark eyes. Marrying her had been a strategic move, a way to legitimize his bare-knuckle corporate raiding with the sophisticated gloss of her family name Rossi. The Rossi Group was a silent giant in logistics and shipping, a dynasty that valued discretion and honor above all else. Isabella was 7 months pregnant with their first child, a son. He had feigned ecstatic joy, of course. A son was an heir, another piece of the dynasty he was building. But pregnancy had made Isabella even more domestic. She was focused on nursery colors and prenatal vitamins, while he was closing a hostile takeover of a multi-billion-dollar tech firm. They were living in different worlds. He had told her this trip was a crucial last-minute business retreat in Monaco, a necessary evil to secure their son's future. The lie had slid off his tongue as easily as the champagne he was now drinking. "When does the crew serve lunch?" Chloe asked, stretching languidly like a cat. "I'm craving lobster." "Whatever you want, whenever you want," Damien said, gesturing vaguely toward the yacht's interior. "Just ask one of the staff." He had chartered the finest vessel from the most exclusive fleet in the Mediterranean. The service was meant to be impeccable, invisible until needed. He felt a pang of annoyance. He'd specifically told the charter company he wanted minimal interaction with the crew. He and Chloe were the only guests. He wanted privacy, anonymity. He'd paid an exorbitant premium for it. So far, they had been perfectly discreet. A steward would appear with a fresh bottle of champagne the moment the old one was empty, then vanish. Meals were served and cleared with quiet efficiency. "I think I'll go change for lunch," Chloe announced, pressing a light kiss to his shoulder. "I want to wear the new white bikini. Will you take some pictures for my feed later?" "Of course," he said, barely looking up from his phone as he scanned the market futures. Even in paradise, the hunt never stopped. As Chloe disappeared below deck, Damien allowed himself a moment of pure, unadulterated satisfaction. He had it all: the ruthless business empire, the beautiful pregnant wife from a respected family securing his legacy, and the stunning carefree mistress for his pleasure. He managed his life like a portfolio, diversifying his assets, hedging his bets, and ensuring every component served his ultimate ambition. He was the master of his universe, and every person in it played the part he assigned them. A shadow fell over him. He looked up, expecting a steward with a fresh towel. Instead, it was a man in a crisp white captain's uniform. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a stern, weathered face and piercing blue eyes. Silver threaded his temples, and his posture was ramrod straight, suggesting a military background. "Mr. Blackwood," the captain said, his voice a low, formal baritone. "I am Captain Marcus Thorne. I apologize for the intrusion. I wanted to personally assure you that we are on schedule for our arrival in Santorini tomorrow morning." Damien felt a prickle of irritation at the interruption. "Fine. That's fine, Captain. Everything is satisfactory." He waved a dismissive hand, a gesture he usually reserved for junior analysts. "You can return to your duties." The captain's expression didn't flicker. He stood his ground, his hands clasped behind his back. "Very good, sir. I simply thought it proper to introduce myself. We at Rossi Maritime pride ourselves on personal service, especially for family." Damien's mind snagged on the name. Rossi Maritime. Isabella's family. The Rossi Group. He felt a sudden sharp spike of unease. He'd booked the charter through a third-party luxury concierge, a service designed for absolute discretion. He'd paid them a fortune to ensure no names were linked, no trails were left. How could this have happened? Was it a coincidence? It had to be. The Rossi Group was vast. They had holdings in dozens of industries. "Family," Damien repeated, forcing a casual tone. "Indeed, sir," Captain Thorne said, his gaze unwavering. "It is an honor to finally have you aboard one of our vessels." Before Damien could process the implications, he heard the soft footfalls of someone approaching from the main salon. He turned a pre-rehearsed smile for Chloe, ready on his lips. But it wasn't Chloe. It was Isabella, his very pregnant, very composed wife. She was wearing a simple but elegant white sundress that did little to hide the swell of her stomach. Her dark hair was pulled back from her face, and her expression was one of serene, icy calm. Damien's blood ran cold. The champagne flute suddenly felt slick in his hand. The entire world seemed to tilt on its axis, the brilliant blue of the sky and sea blurring into a nauseating swirl. Captain Thorne's posture became even more rigid. He turned to face Isabella, brought his heels together with a faint click, and raised his hand in a sharp, formal salute. "Welcome aboard, Mrs. Blackwood," he said, his voice ringing with a profound, unwavering respect. "It's good to have you with us." Damien froze. The sound of the captain's words, the salute, the impossible presence of his wife on this yacht. It was a combination so surreal, so catastrophic, that his mind simply refused to compute. He just stared, his mouth slightly agape, the smirk he'd worn moments before now, a grotesque mask of disbelief. The king was in his castle, but the walls had just turned to glass. The silence that followed the captain's salute was more deafening than any explosion. It stretched for an eternity, thick with unspoken accusations, and the quiet hum of the yacht's engines, which suddenly sounded like a countdown to doom. Damien's mind, usually a high-speed processor of risk and strategy, had blue-screened. He could only stare at Isabella standing there like a calm, avenging angel under the harsh Mediterranean sun. Isabella's gaze wasn't on him. It was fixed on the captain. She gave a slight, regal nod. "Thank you, Marcus. It's good to be here. Please ensure my luggage is taken to the master suite." "Of course, ma'am," Captain Thorne replied, his face a mask of professional deference. He turned, gave Damien one last unreadable look, and strode away with purpose, his white shoes silent on the teak deck. The spell was broken. Damien finally found his voice, though it came out as a strangled rasp. "Isabella, what are you doing here? How—" Her dark eyes finally swiveled to meet his. There was no fire in them, no hysteria, no tears. There was something far worse, disappointment, cold and absolute. "I should ask you the same thing, Damien," she said, her voice even and smooth, "though I believe I already know the answer. You're on a business retreat, aren't you? Closing that big tech deal in Monaco." Each word was a precisely placed dagger. He felt his composure, the carefully constructed facade of the untouchable corporate titan, begin to crack. He opened his mouth to lie, to formulate some incredible, desperate explanation, but just then a new voice joined the tableau. "D. What's taking so long I can't decide between the white or the blue bikini." Chloe emerged from the companionway, holding 2 scraps of expensive fabric. She stopped dead when she saw Isabella. Her sun-kissed, smiling face went slack with confusion. Her eyes darted from Damien's horrified expression to Isabella's pregnant belly, then back again. The dots connected with an almost audible click. "Oh my God," Chloe whispered, her hands flying to her mouth. Who are you?" Isabella turned her head slowly, appraising Chloe from head to toe with a detached, almost clinical curiosity. It was a look that stripped Chloe of all her youthful confidence, leaving her feeling cheap and exposed. "My name is Isabella Blackwood," she said, her tone polite but laced with steel. "I'm Damien's wife." The word wife hung in the air, a thermonuclear device detonated in the placid sea air. Chloe let out a small, wounded sound, a mix of a gasp and a sob. She looked at Damien, her blue eyes wide with betrayal and panic. "Wife, you told me you were divorced. You told me." Damien's mind was racing, trying to find a way to control the spiraling disaster. "Isabella, listen to me. This isn't what it looks like. This is a misunderstanding." Isabella actually laughed. It wasn't a sound of mirth. It was a brittle, hollow sound that was more chilling than any scream. "A misunderstanding, Damien, please. Don't insult my intelligence on top of everything else. You're on a yacht with a half-naked, 20-something thousands of miles from where you're supposed to be. The only misunderstanding here was my foolish belief that you might possess a shred of decency." He took a step toward her, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "Bella, please, let's go inside. Let's talk about this privately." "Privately?" she scoffed. "You forfeited the right to privacy the moment you invited her," she said, gesturing toward Chloe without even gracing her with a glance. "On this trip. And as for talking, I believe we're past that." Chloe, recovering from her initial shock, found a spark of defensive anger. "He loves me," she blurted out, her voice trembling. "He was going to leave you." Damien flinched, as if he'd been struck. "Chloe, shut up!" He hissed the command born of pure panic. Isabella's gaze remained fixed on her husband. Was that the story you sold her, Damien? Along with the tale about the resized signet ring? She held up her own hand, where a simple, elegant platinum band sat beside a stunning cushion-cut diamond. "This is what a wedding ring looks like. And this," she said, placing a protective hand on her swollen belly, "is what a consequence looks like." The directness of the attack left him reeling. He had always been the one in control, the one who dictated the terms of every conversation, every negotiation. Now he was adrift, his usual tactics of bluster and deflection rendered useless by her cold, hard facts. "How did you find me?" He managed to ask the question laced with a grudging respect for her strategy. "You seem to be under the impression that you are a very clever man, Damien," Isabella said, taking a step closer. The scent of her light floral perfume, the one he always associated with home and stability, was a cruel irony. "Your flaw is that you assume everyone else is stupid. You booked this trip through discreet channels, but money always leaves a trail. And when the final payment is wired to a subsidiary of Rossi Maritime, my family's primary holding company, the trail leads directly to my father's desk." The blood drained from Damien's face. Rossi Maritime. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a trap. He hadn't just been caught. He had paid his wife's family a fortune to facilitate his own infidelity on their own vessel with their own loyal crew. The sheer exquisite totality of his miscalculation was staggering. "My father called me yesterday," Isabella continued, her voice dropping to a near whisper, forcing him to lean in to hear. "He was concerned. He said there was a charter booked under a shell corporation, but the payment profile had markers that looked like yours. He asked if you were planning a surprise for me." She paused, letting the bitter irony hang in the air. "Imagine that. A surprise." Chloe began to cry in earnest, now her mascara starting to run. The idyllic dream had curdled into a nightmare. I think I'm going to be sick," she stammered, backing away toward the railing. "There's a powder room just inside to your left," Isabella said calmly, her attention never leaving Damien. "The steward can bring you a glass of water. Or perhaps something stronger. I believe my husband has fully stocked the bar." The casual dismissal, the effortless command she exhibited, cemented the new power dynamic. This was her ship. This was her world. And he was just a trespassing fool. "Isabella," he began again, his voice cracking with desperation. "We can fix this, I swear. It was a mistake. A stupid, meaningless mistake." "A mistake," she said, her voice finally rising with a tremor of long-suppressed pain. "Calling a client by the wrong name is a mistake, Damien. Forgetting to pick up milk is a mistake. This is a betrayal of me, of our marriage, of the child I am carrying." She gestured around the opulent deck. "You built this monument to your ego on a foundation of lies, and you were so arrogant you thought no one would ever notice the cracks." She took a deep breath, composing herself once more. "The time for your lies is over. Now you're going to listen. Captain Thorne has his orders. We are changing course." "Changing course to where?" he asked, a new dread dawning. "Home," Isabella said. "But not to our home. We're going back to my family's estate, and you and I are going to have a very serious conversation. A negotiation, if you will. And for the first time in your life, Damien, you are coming to the table with absolutely no leverage at all." Damien felt like he was drowning in the brilliant sunshine. The world had inverted. He, Damien Blackwood, the man who brought giants of industry to their knees, was standing on a yacht he'd paid for being given orders by the wife he had so casually betrayed. The word leverage echoed in his mind. It was the bedrock of his existence. Every deal, every relationship was a calculation of power, and Isabella had just declared him bankrupt. Inside the main salon, Chloe was having a full-blown meltdown. Her sobs were punctuated by hiccuping accusations. "You lied to me. You said you were single. You used me." A steward, a young man with a professionally blank face, offered her a glass of water, which she knocked from his hand. The glass shattered on the polished mahogany floor. Damien flinched at the sound. It felt like a metaphor for his life. Isabella walked past the scene as if it were a minor inconvenience like a spilled drink. She sat down on one of the plush white sofas, her posture perfect, her hands resting calmly on her pregnant belly. "Clean that up, please," she said to the steward, who nodded and immediately returned with a dustpan. She then looked at Damien. "Sit down." It wasn't a request. He sank into the armchair opposite her, his legs feeling weak. The bravado, the arrogance that was his armor, had been stripped away. He felt naked and exposed. "What do you want, Isabella?" he asked, his voice low. "Money." "Do you want a divorce?" "Oh, we're far beyond a simple divorce," she replied, a humorless smile touching her lips. "A divorce would be too easy. You'd give me a generous settlement. We'd sign some papers, and you'd be back to your life with a new trophy in a month." "No. This requires a more comprehensive solution." Chloe, seeing she was being completely ignored, ramped up her hysterics. "I'm not just some trophy. He told me he loved me. He was going to buy me an apartment in Soho." Isabella finally turned her head to look at the younger woman. Her gaze was not unkind, but it was firm like a teacher addressing a particularly slow student. "Miss Decker, is it?" she asked. Chloe sniffled and nodded. "Let me give you a piece of advice. Men like Damien don't love people. They acquire assets. You were an asset, a temporary one, and right now your value has plummeted. I suggest you go to the guest cabin, pack your things, and think about your next move. The captain will arrange a tender to take you to the nearest port as soon as we can make arrangements. Your association with my husband is officially terminated." The finality in her tone was absolute. Chloe stared dumbfounded, then looked at Damien pleadingly. Are you going to let her talk to me like that?" Damien couldn't meet her eyes. What could he say? "She's right. I did use you. This woman owns the boat we're on, and very likely my entire future." He remained silent. A coward in a $1,000 shirt. With a final heartbroken sob, Chloe turned and fled down the hallway to the guest cabins. The silence returned heavier this time. "She's just a child, really," Isabella said thoughtfully, more to herself than to him. "Dazzled by money and a life she thinks she wants. I almost feel sorry for her." She then refocused on Damien, her expression hardening. "I don't feel sorry for you." "Bella, I am sorry," he pleaded, leaning forward. "More than you can imagine. I was wrong. I was stupid. I'll do anything to make it right." "Anything?" she challenged, raising an eyebrow. "That's a dangerous word, Damien. People who say anything are usually the first to balk when the price is named." "Name it," he said, his desperation making him reckless. "All right. she said, her demeanor shifting into something he recognized, the cool, collected strategist. It was the same way she approached her charity board meetings, with quiet authority and meticulous preparation. He realized with a jolt that he had never once seen her direct that formidable intelligence toward him. He had always been on her team. Now he was the opposition. "Firstly," she began, "you are under a misconception. You didn't just cheat on your pregnant wife. You endangered the future of the Rossi Group." He recoiled. "What? That's ridiculous. My personal life has nothing to do with your family's business." "Doesn't it?" she countered. "Our marriage wasn't just a romance, Damien. It was a merger. Your name, Blackwood, became associated with my name, Rossi. Your reputation, for better or worse, reflects on us, my father and my uncles. They value loyalty and integrity above all else. They tolerated your ruthless business practices because you were family and you were discreet. But this," she gestured around the yacht, "is not discreet. This is a public spectacle waiting to happen. Imagine the headlines: Corporate Raider Damien Blackwood's Yacht Tryst with Model Exposed. How do you think that reflects on the Rossi name, on our shareholders, on our legacy?" He hadn't thought of that. In his arrogance, he had seen his marriage and his affairs as two separate compartments. He had never considered that the walls were permeable. "Secondly," she continued, "you have proven that your judgment is compromised. You were so consumed by your own ego that you booked your affair on a yacht owned by your wife's family. That isn't just immoral, it's incompetent. It shows a level of recklessness that makes you a liability." The word liability hit him like a physical blow. In his world, liabilities were cut loose without a second thought. "And thirdly," she said, her voice softening slightly but losing none of its power, "you broke my heart. You took the one thing I thought was real between us, the future we were building for our son, and you desecrated it for a cheap thrill. That is the debt that will be the hardest to repay." The cabin door opened, and Captain Thorne entered. He addressed only Isabella. "Ma'am, we have altered course. We will be at a secure docking point in 2 hours, where a private car will be waiting. I can also have a tender ready for Miss Decker at your command." "Thank you, Marcus. Please have the tender ready," Isabella instructed. She stood up, her movement graceful despite her pregnancy. "The conversation is over for now, Damien. I suggest you use the next 2 hours to contemplate the concept of a life without the Blackwood-Rossi alliance. Think about what your company, your reputation and your future look like when you are no longer my husband, but simply my father's biggest disappointment." She walked toward the master suite, pausing at the door. "Oh, and Damien," she added, looking back at him over her shoulder. "You'll be sleeping in one of the guest cabins. I believe the one opposite Miss Decker's is available." The door clicked shut, leaving him alone in the opulent salon. The half-empty champagne flutes, the scattered luxury magazines, it all seemed like a vulgar parody of the life he'd been living just an hour ago. He was a castaway on his own island of decadence, and the storm he had created was just beginning to make landfall. The 2-hour journey back to the mainland was the longest of Damien's life. He didn't see Isabella. He stayed in the salon, nursing a glass of whiskey, the amber liquid doing nothing to calm the frantic storm in his gut. He watched from a window as a small, fast boat, a tender, pulled up alongside the yacht. A few minutes later, Chloe, her face hidden behind oversized sunglasses and a wide-brimmed hat, scurried aboard with her luggage. She didn't look back. The tender sped off a small white scar on the vast blue sea, and just like that, a chapter of his life was erased. When they docked, It wasn't at a bustling public marina. It was a private, heavily secured pier. A black, sleek sedan with tinted windows was waiting. Captain Thorne escorted Isabella to the car, with the reverence of a knight serving his queen. Damien followed like a prisoner being transferred. The captain gave him a single hard look before closing Isabella's door. It was a look of pure contempt. The drive was silent. Isabella stared out her window, her face a serene, unreadable mask. Damien's mind, however, was in overdrive. This was a crisis, but every crisis was an opportunity. He was a negotiator. He just needed to find her price. He'd offer her a staggering divorce settlement, majority ownership of their properties, a trust for the baby that would make him royalty. He would apologize, grovel, do whatever it took to control the damage and cut his losses. He could rebuild. He always rebuilt. The car passed through ornate iron gates and swept up a long cypress-lined driveway, coming to a stop before a sprawling villa that clung to the cliffs overlooking the sea. This was the Rossi family estate, a place of quiet, generational power that made his flashy Manhattan penthouse look like a child's plaything. Inside the villa was cool and silent. A stern-looking woman in her 60s, the housekeeper greeted Isabella with a warm embrace and a worried look, completely ignoring Damien. "Show my husband to the East Wing guest suite, Maria," Isabella said, "and bring a bottle of sparkling water to the study for me and my guest." "Guest?" Damien asked, latching onto the word. Isabella turned to him, her eyes cold. "My guest, not yours. You will wait until you are summoned." He was led away down a marble hallway, the silence of the house pressing in on him. This was her home turf. He was completely isolated from his network, his lawyers, his power. An hour later, a soft knock came at his door. It was Maria. "Mrs. Blackwood will see you in the study now." The study was a magnificent room, lined with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with leather-bound volumes. A large mahogany desk sat before a picture window with a commanding view of the sea. Isabella was not alone. Seated in a leather armchair was a man in his late 50s, impeccably dressed in a tailored grey suit. He had thinning silver hair, sharp, intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and a calm, professional demeanor. "Damien, I'd like you to meet Mr. Sterling," Isabella said. "He's a private consultant who has been assisting me for the past 6 months." Damien's blood ran cold. He knew the name. Sterling wasn't just a consultant. He was the best and most discreet private investigator in Europe, a man employed by corporations and billionaires to unearth secrets that could topple empires. "Mr. Blackwood," Sterling said, his voice dry and precise. He did not offer to shake hands. On the desk between them was a thick, spiral-bound document. The cover simply read, DBO. Asset Analysis. "For 6 months, Damien said, the words catching in his throat. "You've been investigating me for 6 months. Your math is excellent," Isabella replied coolly. "It was around the time you started working late, 4 nights a week, and taking solo weekend trips to de-stress. I am not a fool, Damien. I felt the distance. I saw the signs. But unlike you, I do not act on impulse. I act on information." She gestured to the report. "Mr. Sterling has been compiling a comprehensive picture of your extracurricular activities. It's quite thorough. It details not only your affair with Miss Decker, which it turns out is your 3rd in our 2 years of marriage, but also some rather questionable financial dealings." Damien felt the floor drop outward from under him. The other affairs had been brief, meaningless. He thought he'd been so careful. "Questionable dealings," he scoffed, trying to regain some footing. My business is an open book. Mr. Sterling spoke for the first time, his voice devoid of emotion. Not quite, Mr. Blackwood. We found the shell corporation Aperture Holdings, which you use to charter the yacht. It's also the same corporation you've been using to channel funds for personal expenses, luxury gifts, hotel suites, undeclared bonuses for your personal assistant, who seems to be remarkably adept at booking last-minute travel for two. He opened the report. It was filled with copies of credit card statements, hotel receipts, even photographs. There was a picture of him and Chloe having dinner in Paris, another of him with a brunette woman, a junior executive from a rival firm leaving a hotel in Zurich. Each page was a nail being hammered into his coffin. But this, Isabella said, her voice dropping, is the part that truly interests my family. She flipped to a section titled Project Chimera. It was the code name for his hostile takeover of the tech firm, a deal he was on the verge of closing. It was his masterpiece, the deal that would make him a legend. Project Chimera, Isabella read aloud, is partially leveraged against projected Q4 earnings from Blackwood Capital. However, a significant portion of the initial seed funding, a silent partner investment of $100 million, was provided by an offshore entity controlled by the Rossi Group. He stared at her, utterly baffled. What? That's impossible. The investment came from a Cayman Islands fund. A fund my father controls, Isabella finished for him. He believed in your vision. He wanted to support his son-in-law's ambitions without making it look like a family handout. He invested in you, Damien. My family invested in you. The magnitude of his betrayal suddenly expanded, growing from a personal indiscretion to a catastrophic business blunder. He had taken the Rossi family's money and used the freedom it gave him to cavort around the world, making a mockery of their trust. The terms of that silent investment, Mr. Sterling added calmly, contain a standard but stringent morality clause. Clause 12b. Any action on the part of the primary beneficiary, that's you, which brings disrepute or public scandal upon the investors, constitutes a material breach of contract. In the event of such a breach, the investors have the right to immediately call in their loan, with interest and penalties. Damien finally understood. This wasn't about a divorce settlement. This was an execution. If my father calls in that loan, Isabella explained as if to a child, your financing for the Chimera deal collapses. Your other lenders will panic. Your credit lines will be frozen. It will trigger a confidence crisis in Blackwood Capital. The entire house of cards you've built, Damien. It will all come tumbling down. She leaned back in her chair, her power absolute. She wasn't just holding the keys to their marriage. She was holding the kill switch to his entire empire. So, she said, her calm voice, a terrifying counterpoint to the chaos erupting in his soul. Let's not talk about what you are willing to offer me in a divorce. Let's talk about what you are willing to give me to prevent your own complete and utter annihilation. Damien stared at the report on the desk, the neat black type, a death sentence. Clause 12b. A morality clause. It was boilerplate, a relic of a bygone era of business he'd never paid any mind. In his world, deals were bound by numbers and profit margins, not by fuzzy concepts like honor and repute. He had underestimated the Rossi way of doing business. He had underestimated Isabella. He had underestimated everything. This is insane, he stammered, his voice hoarse. You would destroy my company, our assets over a personal matter. You made it a business matter the moment you leveraged my family's trust and money, Isabella countered, her voice sharp. You seem to think this is about revenge. It's not. This is about protecting my family's name and securing my child's future. A future I no longer trust you to be a part of." Mr. Sterling, ever the dispassionate observer, cleared his throat. "Mrs. Blackwood is correct to be concerned. The potential for scandal is significant. A man of your public profile, Mr. Blackwood, a messy divorce, accusations of infidelity while your wife is pregnant. It would be a media firestorm. The board members of the company you're trying to acquire are notoriously conservative. Such a scandal could easily give them the ammunition they need to rally shareholders against your takeover bid. Even without the Rossi loan being called, your deal would be in jeopardy." Every word was a hammer blow. They had thought of everything. They had mapped out every possible consequence, every ripple effect of his actions, while he had been thinking no further than which bottle of champagne to order next. "What do you want?" Damien finally asked, the fight draining out of him. He was no longer a negotiator. He was a supplicant. Isabella leaned forward, her hands clasped on the desk. This was her boardroom now. "Here are my terms. They are not negotiable. First, you will cede full uncontested custody of our son to me. Your name will be on the birth certificate, but all legal and parental rights will be mine. You will have supervised visitation at my discretion." The first blow landed, and it was brutal. His son, his heir. He would be nothing more than a visitor in his own child's life. "Second," she continued, her voice unwavering, "you will sign over a controlling interest, 51% of Blackwood Capital, to a trust that I will manage on behalf of our son. You will remain the CEO, the public face of the company, but I will have final say on all major financial decisions. I will be the board. Your salary and bonuses will be determined by me." He was speechless. She wasn't just taking his family. She was taking his empire. He would be a puppet CEO in the company he had built from scratch. "Third," she said, her gaze intensifying, "you will issue a public apology. Not for your infidelity, we will handle that part quietly, but for financial missteps. You will step down from the board of 2 major charities, citing the need to focus on restructuring your company. This will be a controlled narrative. You are the brilliant but overextended executive, and I, your supportive wife, am stepping in to help stabilize the ship. It protects the Rossi name and gives a plausible reason for my sudden involvement in your business." It was a brilliant Machiavellian strategy. She wasn't just punishing him. She was seizing control while simultaneously positioning herself as a dutiful, stabilizing force, a hero in the narrative of his failure. "And finally," she said, "Mr. Sterling's report and all his findings will be placed in a secure vault held by my family's lawyers. Think of it as an insurance policy. If you ever deviate from our agreement, if you ever challenge my custody, if you ever try to undermine my control of the company, the report will be leaked, not just to the press but to the SEC. Mr. Sterling has uncovered a few creative accounting practices related to your Aperture holdings that government regulators might find fascinating." Checkmate. She had him trapped from every possible angle. Personal, financial, legal. Any move he made would only tighten the noose. He looked from Isabella's resolute face to Mr. Sterling's impassive one. He was looking for a crack, some sign of weakness he could exploit. There was none. "You can't do this," he whispered the words, tasting like ash. "Isabella, we had a life. We were building a future." "No, Damien," she corrected him gently, but with a finality that broke him. "You were building an empire, and I was a convenient part of the architecture. You had a life, and you had a separate one with Chloe, and who knows who else. I am not destroying our future. I am salvaging what is left of it for our son from the wreckage you created." She picked up a pen from the desk. "My father is waiting for my call. If I tell him to proceed, the loan is called. If I tell him we have reached an agreement, he will hold. The choice is yours, Damien. Annihilation or subjugation. What will it be?" He thought of the years of work, the ruthless 100-hour weeks, the sacrifices, the betrayals he'd committed to climb to the top. He thought of the power he wielded, the fear and respect his name commanded. He could lose it all in the space of a single phone call. Or he could keep the shell of his life, the title, the office, but lose his soul, his autonomy. He looked at Isabella. Truly looked at her for the first time in a long time. He had married her for her name and her poise, but he had never bothered to understand the steel that lay beneath. He had seen a beautiful painting and mistaken it for a simple decoration, never realizing it was a masterpiece of strength and strategy. Slowly his head bowed in defeat. The king had been deposed. "Draw up the papers," he said, his voice a dead, hollow thing. "I'll sign." Isabella gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. She had not gloated. She had not smiled. She had simply won. She picked up the phone on the desk, not to call her father, but to summon her lawyers. The Rossi gambit had paid off. The days that followed were a surreal, humiliating blur for Damien. He remained at the Rossi estate, a prisoner in a palace. His phone was returned to him, but every call he made felt monitored. He spoke to his own lawyers, high-priced sharks, who had always snarled and fought for him. But when he explained the situation, their tone changed. Faced with the combined legal might of the Rossi Group and the explosive contents of the Sterling report, they became conciliatory, advising him to cooperate fully. There was no angle to fight, no loophole to exploit. Isabella's trap was perfectly constructed. The signing took place not in a sterile boardroom, but in the same sun-drenched study where he had been broken. Isabella sat at the head of the table, flanked by her father, Alberto Rossi, a man with quiet, disappointed eyes that were somehow more intimidating than any overt anger. Mr. Sterling was present, a silent sentinel guarding his damning report. Damien sat opposite them with his own lawyer, who looked deeply uncomfortable. One by one, the documents were placed before him. The transfer of 51% of his company, shares to the new trust. The revised corporate governance charter that named Isabella as the sole arbiter of the board. The custody agreement that reduced his fatherhood to a footnote. The pre-written public statement announcing his strategic restructuring. He signed each one, his hand feeling like it belonged to someone else. With every stroke of the pen, a piece of his old life, his power, his very identity, was signed away. When it was over, Alberto Rossi spoke for the first time, his voice raspy but firm. "You will not fail my daughter again," he said. It was both a warning and a command. Damien could only nod, unable to meet the old man's gaze. His return to New York was a quiet affair. He and Isabella flew back on a private jet, a Rossi jet, he noted grimly. They moved back into their Manhattan penthouse, but it no longer felt like his home. It was a stage, and they were actors in a play of her devising. They were to present a united front, the picture of a strong couple navigating a corporate challenge together. The first board meeting of the new Blackwood capital was the ultimate humiliation. He walked into the room where he had once been an absolute monarch and took his seat. Isabella sat at the opposite end of the table, not in the official chairman's seat, but in a position that still commanded the room's attention. She said very little, but her presence was a constant reminder of who was truly in charge. When he proposed an aggressive new acquisition, she simply said, "We'll table that for now, Damien. Our focus is on stability." The board members who would have once rubber-stamped his every whim nodded in agreement with her. He was a king in name, only a figurehead on his own ship. His life became a gilded prison. He had the money, the penthouse, the tailored suits, but he had no freedom. Isabella managed his schedule, approved his expenses, and monitored his communications. The supervised visitations with his son, when he was born, were excruciating. The baby named Marco, after Isabella's grandfather, was beautiful. But Damien could only hold him in the presence of Isabella, or a nanny, feeling like a stranger visiting someone else's child. Isabella was a natural mother, loving and fiercely protective. Watching her with Marco filled him with a toxic cocktail of longing and resentment. One evening, about a year after the incident on the yacht, he found her in the nursery, rocking the sleeping baby. "He looks like you," Damien said softly from the doorway. Isabella didn't turn around. "He has the Rossi eyes," she replied, a subtle but clear statement of ownership. "Isabella," he said, his voice thick with a year of suppressed frustration, "how long are we going to do this charade? I'm living in a cage." She finally turned to look at him, her expression tired but resolute. "This is not a cage, Damien. This is a consequence. This is the life you chose when you decided that vows were optional and honesty was a weakness. You wanted a life without limits, and now you have one with very firm boundaries. Boundaries that I will enforce to protect my son." "I've learned my lesson," he pleaded. "I've done everything you've asked. When does it end? When do I get my life back?" "You're asking the wrong question," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper so as not to wake the baby. "You're still thinking about what you can get back. You should be thinking about what you can build from where you are now. You can be a father to Marco within the lines we've drawn. You can run the company within the framework we've established. Or you can continue to see yourself as a prisoner and be miserable for the rest of your days." She paused, her gaze holding his. "The choice, as it always was, is yours, but the power is mine." He stood there, silenced by the simple, brutal truth of her words. He had been so focused on what he had lost, his absolute power, his freedom to indulge his worst impulses, that he hadn't considered what was left. He had a son. He had a company, even if he didn't fully control it. He had a chance to be something other than the man who had crashed and burned so spectacularly. It was not the life he had wanted. It was not the empire he had schemed to build. But as he looked at his wife, a woman he had so grievously wronged, and his sleeping son, he realized it might be the only life he had left. The mistress, the yacht. The lies, they were all part of a shallow, hollow man. Isabella had not just taken his company, she had taken his life down to the studs. The question that remained, the one he had never had to ask himself before, was what kind of man he would be now that he had to rebuild. 5 years passed. The world of Damien Blackwood was irrevocably changed. Blackwood Capital, under the quiet, steadying influence of Isabella's oversight, had transformed. The era of risky, hostile takeovers was over. The company's new focus was on sustainable growth, long-term investments, and ethical practices. Profits were more stable, if less spectacular, and the company's reputation had never been better. Damien was still the CEO, his name on the letterhead, but the industry insiders knew the truth. The real power behind the throne was Isabella Rossi Blackwood. Damien himself had changed. The arrogant swagger was gone, replaced by a weary, cautious humility. He was no longer the predator. He was the manager. The gilded prison had become a routine. He excelled at his work within the new boundaries, finding a strange satisfaction in building something stable, rather than just conquering. His relationship with Isabella remained a cool professional partnership. They were co-parents and business partners, the embers of their marriage long since turned to ash. There were no other women. He wouldn't have dared, and more surprisingly, he no longer had the desire. The thrill of the chase had been replaced by a deep-seated fear of the consequences. His relationship with his son Marco was the most complicated part of his new life. The visitations were no longer supervised, but a distance remained. Marco was a bright, happy 6-year-old who loved his mother unconditionally and treated his father with a polite, slightly detached affection. Damien was the fun weekend dad, the one who took him to ball games and the zoo. But it was Isabella who tucked him in at night, who knew his fears and his dreams. He was a guest in his own son's life, a fact that was a constant dull ache in his chest. One sunny afternoon, Damien received an invitation. It was for the christening of a new yacht. The invitation was from Rossi Maritime, and the yacht's name was the Marco. He knew he was expected to attend. The event was held at the same private pier where his world had fallen apart. As he stepped out of the car, the memories hit him with the force of a physical blow. He saw the new yacht, a magnificent vessel even larger and more elegant than the Serenity. A crowd of well-dressed guests mingled on the dock. He saw Isabella standing near the gangplank, talking to her father. She looked radiant in a blue dress that matched the sea. She was laughing, and the sight of her genuine happiness was like a twist of a knife. She was thriving not just in spite of him, but because of his downfall. She had taken the disaster he created and built a better, stronger world from it. As the ceremony began, a familiar figure in a crisp white uniform stepped forward. It was Captain Marcus Thorne. He looked older, the silver at his temples now more prominent, but his posture was just as rigid, his gaze just as sharp. He was the captain of the Marco. He caught Damien's eye for a brief moment, and this time there was no contempt in his look. There was something that might have been a flicker of pity, or perhaps just acknowledgement. Isabella gave a short speech. She spoke of family, of legacy, and of new beginnings. She spoke of the sea's power to wash away the old and welcome the new. Her words were for the crowd, but Damien felt as if they were aimed directly at him. After the champagne bottle was broken across the bow, Damien found himself standing alone by the railing, looking out at the water. "It's a beautiful vessel." He turned. It was Isabella. "Yes," he said. "It is." They stood in silence for a moment, the chattering of the guests a distant buzz. "You've done a good job with the company, Damien," she said unexpectedly. The last quarter's report was impressive. It was the first time she had offered him praise in 5 years. "I had a good advisor," he replied, the admission costing him a sliver of his remaining pride. She gave a small smile. "Marco is starting soccer next week. He asked if you'd be there for his first game." "Of course," he said immediately. "When is it?" "Saturday at 10 a.m. I'll send you the details." She paused, her gaze distant. "He's a good boy, Damien. He deserves to have a father at his games." It was a small thing, an olive branch the size of a twig, but it felt momentous. It was an acknowledgement that he was more than just a weekend activity, that he had a place however small in their lives. "Isabella." He began the words coming out before he could stop them. I know it's years too late, but I truly am sorry for everything." She looked at him, her dark eyes searching his. The ice that had been there for so long seemed to thaw just a little. "I know, Damien," she said softly. "I've seen it. Not in your words, but in your actions. You are not the man you were on that boat." She turned to leave, then hesitated. "That man," she said, nodding back toward the memory of the Serenity. Thought he was the captain of his own destiny. But he was just a passenger letting his worst impulses steer. It takes a different kind of strength to accept a new course. She walked away, rejoining her family, a queen in her element. Damien watched her go, the sea breeze cool on his face. He was not the captain. He was not even a first mate. But for the first time in 5 long years, he felt like he was finally on board the right ship, heading in a direction that might one day feel like home. And so Damien Blackwood's story isn't just about a man who was caught cheating. It's a powerful lesson in arrogance and consequences. He believed his wealth and power made him untouchable, allowing him to live a life of deceit without repercussions. But he made one fatal miscalculation. He completely underestimated the quiet, intelligent woman he married. Isabella didn't just get mad. She got strategic. She proved that true power isn't about being the loudest person in the room, but about having the wisdom to play the long game. She dismantled his empire, not with rage, but with precision, reminding us all that the deepest betrayals often lead to the most devastating reckonings. What did you think of Isabella's master plan? Was it justice, or was it a cold-hearted takeover? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of drama and consequence, please show your support by hitting that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss another real-life story. Thank you for listening. The flashbulbs were a blinding assault, a predatory storm of light that turned the grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel into a stage. This was the night of the Sterling Vance Foundation Gala, the absolute pinnacle of New York's philanthropic calendar. At the center of it all was Alistair Vance, CEO of Sterling Vance Global, a man who commanded the room with the casual arrogance of a modern emperor. And beside him, visibly pregnant and clinging to his arm, was his wife, Eleonora. Tonight, in front of everyone, he would not just drop her. He would shatter her. This single act of public humiliation was meant to be her end. He never imagined it would be the beginning of his. The air in the ballroom was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and $1,000 orchids. Men in bespoke tuxedos, like a flock of sleek penguins, navigated a sea of women draped in couture. This was Alistair Vance's world. Eleonora Hayes was just living in it, or so he constantly reminded her. Alistair, tall and impeccably dressed by a tailor on Savile Row, clinked his glass with a senator, his laugh booming with manufactured confidence. His eyes, the color of cold steel, scanned the room, counting the influence, the power, the money. He was the CEO of Sterling Vance Global, a multi-billion-dollar logistics empire that had its tentacles in every port on the continent. Eleonora stood slightly behind him, a habit she had developed to make herself smaller. Her dress, a modest navy silk designed to accommodate her 6-month pregnancy, felt like a costume. She was an intelligent woman, a Vassar graduate with a degree in art history. But in Alistair's world, her intellect was an inconvenient, unmarketable accessory. He had married her for her name, Hayes, an old money name that gave his new money hustle a veneer of respectability. He had assumed, incorrectly, that the name was all she had. Alistair, darling. A woman with a face pulled taut by surgery, perhaps a Mrs. Vanderbilt of the modern age, air-kissed him. You've done it again. This gala is the talk of the town. Alistair beamed, placing a possessive hand on the small of Eleonora's back. We do our best, Cynthia. It's all about giving back, isn't it? He squeezed Eleonora's waist, a gesture that looked affectionate, but was, in reality, a warning. Stand straight. Smile. Don't speak. The main event of the evening was Alistair's speech. He was announcing a new, massive donation to the city's opera. He was at the podium, the applause thundering. Eleonora sat at the head table, right in his line of sight, next to Robert Denton, Alistair's COO and chief sycophant. And it is with great pride, Alistair was saying, his voice resonating with practiced sincerity, that we announce the Sterling Vance Initiative. He paused, reaching into his breast pocket for his speech cards. He fumbled. He checked his other pocket. A flicker of panic crossed his face. He looked down at Eleonora, his smile tightening into a grimace. She had been in charge of his speech cards. She had them in her small clutch. She realized his mistake, and, trying to be discreet, began to stand up to hand them to him. But Alistair saw his moment. He was already under pressure from the board about a bad investment in Singapore, and he needed a scapegoat for his momentary lapse. He held up a hand, stopping her. Please, Eleonora, sit down, he said into the microphone. The room, which had been buzzing with whispers, fell dead silent. My wife, he continued with a short, cruel laugh, seems to be a bit overwhelmed. It appears she has misplaced my notes. Then again, she misplaces her keys 3 times a week. Laughter, uncertain at first, then sycophantic, rippled through the front tables. Eleonora froze, her hand still holding the clutch containing his cards. It's just... Alistair sighed, feigning exasperation. You try to give them one simple task. He then looked directly at her, his voice dripping with condescension. Perhaps the pregnancy brain is setting in early. Or perhaps, my dear, you simply aren't cut out for this level of responsibility. It's all right. He waved a dismissive hand. Don't trouble your pretty, empty head about it. I'll just have to wing it. He didn't just insult her. He neutered her. He painted her as an incompetent, decorative, and stupid child. The public humiliation was total. He had branded her as useless. Eleonora did not flinch. She did not cry. She simply lowered her hand, her eyes locking onto his. She sat back down, her posture perfectly straight. The room watched her, expecting tears. They saw nothing. They saw a porcelain doll, serene and empty. Alistair, basking in the perceived recovery, launched into his speech, his charisma winning back the crowd. But he had missed the change. He hadn't seen the ice form in his wife's eyes. He hadn't registered that the woman he had just publicly executed was not the woman who would be riding home with him. He had broken the gilded cage, and he had no idea what he had just unleashed. The applause for his speech was deafening. As he returned to the table, basking in the glow, Robert Denton slapped him on the back. Brilliant recovery, Alistair. Handled it like a pro. Alistair leaned down to Eleonora, his breath hot on her ear. See? That's how it's done. Try to keep up. Eleonora simply turned her head, picked up her water glass, and took a long, slow sip. The first battle had been lost, but the war, a war Alistair didn't even know was being waged, had just been declared. The ride home to their Park Avenue penthouse was a study in oppressive silence. The Rolls-Royce Phantom glided through the sleeping city, its interior insulated from the world, creating a vacuum that amplified the tension. Alistair was scrolling through his phone, a smug half-smile on his face as he read the early press coverage of the gala. Good coverage, he muttered, more to himself than to her. They're calling the initiative bold. They loved it. Eleonora stared out the window, watching the blur of street lights paint fleeting stripes across her silk dress. She had not spoken a single word since the podium. Alistair finally seemed to notice her silence. He sighed, the sound of a man deeply inconvenienced. "Oh, come on, Eleonora. Don't sulk. It was a minor gaffe. You embarrassed me by not having the cards ready, and I covered for us. You need to develop a thicker skin if you're going to be Mrs. Vance." Eleonora turned her head slowly, her expression unreadable in the dark. "You didn't cover for us, Alistair. You filleted me. You used me as a prop to make yourself look charmingly beset by an incompetent wife." Alistair actually scoffed. "Filleted? Don't be so dramatic. It was a joke. People laughed. It's over. Honestly, this sensitivity is exhausting, especially now." He gestured vaguely toward her stomach. "You're carrying my son. My heir. All you have to do is look good and not mess things up. You failed at the not messing things up part tonight. I corrected the error. End of story." The car pulled into the private underground garage. The doorman rushed to open Alistair's door. Alistair got out without a backward glance, assuming she would follow. She did. She followed him into the private elevator. She followed him into the sprawling, cold, marble-floored penthouse. The entire apartment was decorated in shades of grey and black, a mausoleum of modern taste. Alistair loosened his bow tie, tossing his tuxedo jacket over a $1 million Art Deco chair. "I'm going to have a scotch in the study. I've got a call with the Hong Kong office. Don't wait up." He disappeared down the hall, already forgetting her existence. His dismissal was as complete as his public humiliation of her had been. Eleonora walked into their master suite. It was vast, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. She stood in front of a full-length mirror, looking at her reflection. She saw the woman Alistair saw, the pregnant wife, the pretty accessory, the holder of a defunct, respectable name. She touched her stomach. "He thinks we're his property," she whispered to the child within. "He thinks we are just an extension of his ego. He thinks that name, Hayes, is just a bronze plaque on his shiny new building." She watched her own eyes in the mirror. The humiliation had burned away the fog of her marriage. For 2 years, she had tried to be the woman he wanted, the quiet, supportive wife. She had believed his narrative, that her family's legacy was long dead, that she was lucky he had rescued her from a life of quiet, faded obscurity. Alistair had made one fatal miscalculation. He assumed the Hayes family power was just in the name. He had never bothered to read the fine print. Eleonora walked to her bedside table and picked up her phone. She bypassed her usual contacts and scrolled to a number she had not dialed in over a year. She pressed the call button. It rang 3 times. A dry, precise voice answered, despite the late hour. "Yes?" "Gregory," Eleonora said, her voice devoid of all emotion. "It's Eleonora Hayes." She never used her married name with him. There was a pause on the other end. "Ms. Hayes, I have been wondering when I might hear from you. Is everything all right?" "No," Eleonora said. "It is not. But it's about to be." "I see," said Gregory Taft, the sole executor of her father's estate and the man who had managed the Hayes family trust for 3 decades. "He did it, Gregory," Eleonora said, walking to the window and looking down at the city lights. Tonight, at the Foundation Gala, he invoked the public disparagement clause, the moral negligence article, Article 7, Section 4. Gregory Taft drew a sharp, quiet breath. He did it publicly, in front of witnesses, in front of 300 of New York's most powerful people and the press. He called me incompetent, useless, and an empty-headed burden. I believe the exact phrase was pretty empty head. My God, Gregory whispered. The fool, the arrogant fool. Your father always said, I know what my father said, Eleonora interrupted, her voice hardening. And he was right. I was foolish to hope. But I'm not foolish anymore. I want you to execute the transfer. Eleonora, you understand what this means, Gregory said, his lawyerly caution kicking in. Once this is done, there is no going back. The dissolution of the primary trust is immediate. The voting shares transfer from the trust directly to me. All 51% of Sterling Vance Global. I am aware. Alistair Vance will be displeased, Gregory said, in the understatement of the century. Alistair Vance, Eleonora said, placing a protective hand on her stomach, publicly insulted his pregnant wife. Now she is going to become the new chairwoman of his company. I want you to call an emergency board meeting for 9 a.m. Monday. Cite shareholder prerogative. And Gregory? Yes, Ms. Hayes? Have a locksmith and a security team meet me at the Sterling Vance building. I'll be there at 8 a.m. to collect my husband's things. To understand the earthquake Eleonora was about to trigger, one had to understand the history of Sterling Vance Global. The company's glossy marketing materials, all approved by Alistair, told a simple story. Alistair's father, Thomas Vance, and his partner, Arthur Hayes, built a small shipping company. Thomas, the visionary, turned it into a global powerhouse, while Arthur, a quiet academic, faded into the background. When Thomas died, Alistair, a prodigy, took over and led it to unprecedented glory. This narrative was a lie. Arthur Hayes, Eleonora's father, was the true genius. He wasn't a quiet academic. He was a logistical savant, a man who designed the proprietary routing software in the 1990s that became the company's backbone. Thomas Vance was the salesman, the face. The company was originally Hayes Sterling, with Hayes holding a 51% majority stake, and Sterling, an early partner who sold out, and Vance splitting the other 49%. When Arthur Hayes grew ill, he saw Alistair Vance, his partner's son, for exactly what he was, a charismatic sociopath obsessed with image, not substance. Alistair was already dating Eleonora, charming her, seeing her as the final piece of his acquisition. On his deathbed, Arthur Hayes didn't leave his daughter a fortune. He left her an arsenal. He placed his entire 51% stake in an ironclad trust, managed by his lawyer, Gregory Taft. Eleonora would receive a generous stipend, but the voting shares would remain dormant, held by the trust for 20 years. Alistair, upon marrying Eleonora, had his lawyers attack the trust, but it was impenetrable. He was forced to run the company with only his 49%, having bought out the Sterling family, while the 51% majority sat silently on the sidelines. He was the de facto CEO, but he was never the true owner, except for one clause, a clause Alistair had never even known existed, buried deep in the trust's bylaws. Arthur Hayes knew his daughter. He knew she was kind, trusting, and prone to see the good in people. He also knew Alistair would eventually reveal his true nature. The trust, therefore, contained Article 7, Section 4, the Moral Negligence Clause. The clause stated that the trust would be immediately dissolved, and all assets, the 51% voting shares, would be transferred directly to Eleonora Hayes in the event that her husband, Alistair Vance, did commit an act of such profound public disparagement or cruelty as to fundamentally breach the covenant of good faith inherent in their union and his stewardship of the Hayes legacy. The sole arbiter of this breach was the executor, Gregory Taft. For 2 years, Gregory had watched. He had documented every private slight, every dismissive comment Eleonora had confided in him. But Alistair had been careful. Until tonight. Tonight, in his hubris, he had handed Eleonora the keys to the entire kingdom. At 9 a.m. on Monday, Alistair Vance strode into the 60th floor boardroom at the Sterling Vance Tower. He was furious, having been summoned by an emergency text from the board secretary. "What is the meaning of this?" he barked, throwing his briefcase onto the polished mahogany table. "Who called this meeting? I am the CEO. All meetings go through me." The room was already full. The entire board was there. Robert Denton, his man. Beatrice Croft, a sharp older woman who had been on the board since the Hayes Sterling days. Stephen Chen, the neutral CFO, and 2 others. I called it Alistair. Alistair turned. Eleonora was sitting at the head of the table, the traditional chairman's seat. Beside her sat Gregory Taft, who was meticulously arranging a stack of documents. Alistair laughed. It was a harsh, sharp sound. "Eleonora, what is this? Is this a joke? Are you and your dusty old lawyer trying to stage some sort of intervention after your little tantrum over the weekend?" "This is not an intervention, Mr. Vance," Gregory said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of the law. "This is a transfer of power. As of 7:05 a.m. this morning, per the execution of the last will and testament of Arthur Hayes, the primary Hayes Family Trust has been dissolved." The blood drained from Alistair's face. Robert Denton looked confused. "What? What trust?" "Mr. Taft," Eleonora said calmly, "please distribute the folders." Gregory stood and, with the quiet dignity of an undertaker, placed a thick, leather-bound folder in front of each board member. "As you all know," Eleonora began, her voice steady and strong, "my father held a 51% majority stake in this company. For the past 5 years, that stake has been held in a dormant trust. Alistair was white as a sheet. A dormant trust. It's locked for 20 years. Everyone knows this. This is theatre. You have no power here, Eleonora." "Please direct your attention to page 54, Gregory said. "Article 7, Section 4. The board members began to read. Beatrice Croft's eyes widened. Stephen Chen, the CFO, took off his glasses and rubbed his face as if seeing a ghost. "The moral negligence clause," Beatrice whispered, a slow smile spreading across her face. "Arthur, you magnificent bastard." "This is ridiculous," Alistair roared, slamming his fist on the table. "You can't be serious. Public disparagement? You're going to seize control of a $5 billion company because I made a joke at a party." "It wasn't a joke, Alistair. It was a character assassination," Eleonora said, her voice cutting through his rage. "And it was the final condition of my father's will. Mr. Taft, as executor, witnessed your speech at the gala, as did 300 other people. He has certified the breach. The trust is dissolved. The shares are mine." She slid a single piece of paper across the table to him. It was a stock certificate, newly issued, bearing her name, Eleonora Hayes, 51% of Sterling Vance Global. "You," Alistair whispered, his entire body trembling. "You, snake, you planned this. You planned this, Alistair," Eleonora countered, standing up. She was no longer the shrinking wife. She was a woman transformed, radiating a cold authority that filled the room. "You did this. Every time you dismissed me, every time you called me stupid, every time you treated me like an object, you were loading the gun. On Friday night, you just finally pulled the trigger." She looked at the assembled board. "I am now the majority shareholder of this company, and as my first act, I call for a new vote. A vote to remove Alistair Vance as CEO and chairman of the board, effective immediately. The boardroom, which moments before had been a stage for Alistair's disbelief, instantly became a war zone. The air crackled with the charged energy of a hostile takeover. Alistair, recovering from the initial shock, morphed from denial to pure, distilled rage. "You can't do this. This is illegal. This morality clause is archaic. It wouldn't hold up in a kindergarten court, let alone the state of New York." "It was drafted by the finest trust and estate lawyers at Sullivan and Cromwell, Mr. Vance," Gregory Taft replied, his tone placid. "It is ironclad. We have already filed the preliminary injunctions this morning. Any attempt by you to access company funds or assets will be blocked by 6 p.m. today." Alistair spun on the board members. "Robert, you're not going to let this happen, are you? Stephen? We just posted the best quarter in the company's history. Are you going to let her?" He pointed a trembling finger at Eleonora. "A woman who thinks logistics is about matching drapes take over? She's pregnant. She's emotional. She's clearly having a breakdown." Robert Denton, Alistair's COO, stammered. "Alistair, this is a lot to take in. A 51% stake. That's a controlling interest." "It's her," Alistair spat. "She's not a businesswoman." Beatrice Croft, the older board member, finally spoke. Her voice was like dry leaves scraping pavement. "She is Arthur Hayes's daughter, Alistair, and I sat on this board when he was in charge. You, on the other hand, are Thomas Vance's son. All flash, no substance. I've been warning you for a year about the exposure in Singapore. You ignored me." "The Singapore deal is sound," Alistair shouted. "The Singapore deal," Stephen Chen, the CFO, interjected, his voice quiet but firm, "is currently $300 million over budget and is being investigated by local authorities for financial irregularities. I brought this to your attention last month. You told me to bury it in the quarterly." Alistair looked at Stephen as if he'd been stabbed. You're siding with her?" "I am siding with the company, Alistair," Stephen said, adjusting his tie. "And the company's majority shareholder is Ms. Hayes. The bylaws are clear. She has the votes. This is a formality." Eleonora watched the exchange, her hands clasped calmly on the table. She had known this would be messy. She had counted on Alistair's arrogance to be his undoing. "The vote, please," Eleonora said. "A motion to remove Alistair Vance as CEO and chairman, for cause, citing gross mismanagement and reputational risk." "Seconded," Beatrice Croft said instantly. "All in favour?" Beatrice's hand shot up. Stephen Chen's followed a second later. Robert Denton looked at Alistair, his face a mask of panic, and then, seeing his career flashing before his eyes, he slowly, agonizingly, raised his hand. "That's 3, Gregory Taft announced. "With Ms. Hayes's own 51%, the motion carries overwhelmingly. Mr. Vance, you are hereby relieved of your duties." Alistair Vance didn't move. He just stared at Robert Denton, the man he had promoted, the man he golfed with, the man who had just hammered the final nail in his coffin. "Judas," Alistair whispered. "Security," Eleonora said, not to anyone in the room, but into a small earpiece. The boardroom doors opened. 2 large men in professional suits, the private security team she had hired, stepped in. "This is my building," Alistair roared, finally lunging to his feet. "It's my company," Eleonora replied, her voice ice. "Gentlemen, please escort Mr. Vance from the premises. He is to be allowed to collect his personal effects from his office, and that is all. His access codes are to be deactivated immediately." "You won't get away with this, Eleonora," he screamed as the guards took his arms. "I will sue you. I will sue the estate. I will take you for every penny. I'll tell the press you're insane. I'll fight for custody. You will not do this to me." "You did this to yourself, Alistair," she said, turning to look at him as they dragged him to the door. "You publicly insulted your pregnant wife. You just didn't realize who she was. You should have read the fine print." Alistair let out an incoherent yell as the door shut, leaving the boardroom in stunned silence. Eleonora took a deep breath, the first she felt she had taken in years. The adrenaline was pounding, but she held it at bay. She turned back to the shell-shocked board. "Well," she said, pulling the chairman's seat closer to the table. "That's that. Stephen, I want a full, unredacted audit of the Singapore deal and all related shell corporations on my desk by end of day. Beatrice, I'm promoting you to vice chair. I'll need your guidance on cleaning up Alistair's mess. Robert." Robert Denton flinched. "You have 24 hours to prove to me why you're not just Alistair's echo. I suggest you start by finding every file he tried to hide from Stephen. Am I clear?" Robert nodded, sweating. "Yes. Yes, Madam Chairwoman." Eleonora leaned forward. "Good. Now, gentlemen, and Beatrice, let's get to work." The next 2 weeks were a blur of corporate warfare. Alistair, true to his word, had gone to the press. The New York Post ran a lurid headline. "Iris Hormones, pregnant wife, seizes CEO hubby's company in insane coup." Alistair painted himself as the victim of a vindictive, emotionally unstable woman. He gave interviews from a borrowed office, claiming she was being manipulated by the vulture Gregory Taft, and that her pregnancy had made her erratic. He was counting on the sexist narrative to win him public support and spook the shareholders. But Eleonora didn't play his game. She did not give a single interview. She did not issue a statement. She worked. She and Stephen Chen, the CFO, had locked themselves in the finance department. The full, unredacted audit of the Singapore deal was just the tip of the iceberg. "He was sloppy," Stephen said, at 2 a.m. on a Wednesday, surrounded by cold coffee cups and printouts. He was so arrogant, he thought no one would ever check his work. "Show me," Eleonora said, rubbing her temples. The pregnancy made the long hours doubly exhausting, but the rage fueled her. Stephen pointed to a line item. "Here, Apex Holdings, a consulting firm based in the Cayman Islands. He's been wiring them 7 figures a month for the last year, classified as developmental consultation for the Singapore project." "And what is Apex Holdings?" Eleonora asked. "As far as I can tell," Stephen said, "it's nothing. It's a post office box, a ghost corporation. He's been using the Singapore overruns as a cover to siphon money directly from the company." "Embezzlement," Eleonora stated. It wasn't a question. Plain and simple. He was bleeding the company dry. He was building his own lifeboat, probably to finance a hostile buyout of the remaining shares, including, he thought, yours. He just needed more time. His insult at the gala, Eleonora realized aloud. It wasn't just him being cruel. He was under immense pressure. The Singapore deal was collapsing. The auditors were sniffing around. He was lashing out. He needed me to remain small and stupid. "There's more," Stephen said, looking grim. He pulled up a different file, wire transfers from Apex Holdings. He wasn't just saving the money, he was spending it. He showed her the transfers, millions of dollars moving from the Cayman account to a private New York bank. "Who does this account belong to?" Eleonora asked. "I had to pull a few strings," Stephen said. "The account holder is a Ms. Sabrina Reed." The name hit Eleonora like a physical blow. Sabrina Reed, a stunning, ambitious woman from the marketing department. Eleonora had hosted her at the penthouse for a team-building dinner just 6 months ago. Alistair had insisted on it. His mistress, Eleonora whispered. The humiliation she felt at the gala was nothing compared to this. This was a betrayal that cut deeper than any public insult. He hadn't just stolen the company's money, he had stolen it for her. He bought her an apartment, Stephen said softly, showing her the final transaction. A wire transfer to a realtor for a penthouse on Park Avenue, just 10 blocks from their own. Eleonora stood up and walked to the window. The city was laid out before her, a tapestry of indifferent lights. She thought she would feel rage or a desire for revenge. Instead, she felt a profound, cold clarity. Alistair hadn't just seen her as stupid. He had seen her as a complete fool. He had been laughing at her, with his COO, with his mistress, with the entire world. "Stephen," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "I want you to call the SEC, and then I want you to call the district attorney's office. Give them everything. Apex Holdings, Sabrina Reed, the wire transfers, all of it." "Eleonora," Stephen said, that's not just a corporate lawsuit. That's a criminal case. He'll go to prison. He stole $300 million to fund his affair and tried to blame the losses on his empty-headed wife. Prison is where he belongs. What about Ms. Reed? Eleonora thought for a moment. She was a knowing accomplice to fraud. Give her name to the DA as well, and have our legal team file a civil suit to seize the penthouse. It was bought with stolen company money. It belongs to the shareholders. She turned back from the window, her silhouette framed against the skyline. The pregnancy, which Alistair had used as a weapon against her, now felt like armor. "He wanted a war, Stephen," she said. "He just didn't realize I had all the ammunition." Alistair's smear campaign came to an abrupt, screeching halt. The moment the DA's office unsealed the indictment, the narrative changed. Iris Hormones became the Vance conspiracy, CEO indicted for $300 million fraud. Alistair Vance, the man who had commanded ballrooms, was now the subject of a perp walk. The images of him in a rumpled suit, his hands cuffed behind his back, being led into a black sedan by federal agents, were plastered everywhere. His attempt to paint Eleonora as erratic now looked like the desperate, manipulative projections of a cornered criminal. But Eleonora wasn't finished. The criminal charges would take time. The corporate governance of Sterling Vance Global would not. She had called a full, extraordinary meeting of the shareholders. The event was held not in a private boardroom, but in the grand ballroom of the Marriott Marquis, a venue large enough to hold the hundreds of investors, fund managers, and press who had descended. The room was buzzing. Eleonora, now nearly 8 months pregnant, walked onto the stage. She was not the shrinking, nervous woman from the gala. She wore a custom-tailored power suit in a deep charcoal grey, her hair pulled back. She commanded the space. "Good morning," she began, her voice resonating with calm authority. "We are here today for one reason: to restore integrity to Sterling Vance Global. My name is Eleonora Hayes, and as of 2 weeks ago, I am your majority shareholder." She clicked a remote. The screen behind her lit up, not with smiling corporate photos, but with flowcharts. For the last 18 months, the man you knew as your CEO, Alistair Vance, has not been working for you. He has been stealing from you. For 30 minutes, Eleonora laid it all out. She didn't use hyperbole. She used Stephen Chen's audit. She showed them the wire transfers to Apex Holdings. She showed them the false invoices from the Singapore project. She showed them the financial architecture of her husband's grand theft. "This," she said, "is not just mismanagement. It is a profound, criminal breach of fiduciary duty. It stops today." Alistair's few remaining allies in the audience tried to shout her down. A man from a hedge fund that Alistair had personally enriched stood up. "This is a family squabble. You're dragging the company through your messy divorce. What do you, a pregnant art historian, know about running a global logistics empire?" Eleonora looked at him, her gaze unwavering. "I know that you don't sign off on a $300 million expenditure to a company that doesn't exist. I know that you don't leverage the company's pension fund to cover a bad investment, which Mr. Vance did last quarter. And most importantly, I know that the Hayes Sterling routing software, which this company still runs on, was designed by my father, Arthur Hayes. I grew up at his knee, learning this business while Mr. Vance was learning how to cheat at golf." The room fell silent. "Alistair Vance is gone," she continued. "His accomplice, Ms. Sabrina Reed, has been terminated and is facing her own indictment. His COO, Robert Denton, has been fired. We have a new interim board. Beatrice Croft is my vice chair. Stephen Chen is my acting CFO. We have cooperated fully with the SEC and the DA. We will retrieve every stolen dollar." She paused, letting the weight of her actions sink in. "But that is the past. Let's talk about the future." She clicked the remote again. The screen changed to a new logo, a subtle redesign. Hayes Sterling Global. A gasp went through the room. "We are returning to our roots," Eleonora announced. "To integrity, to efficiency, to the genius of Arthur Hayes. My first act as chairwoman is to announce that the entire Singapore project is being scrapped. We are writing off the loss. My second act is to announce a new 10% dividend for all shareholders, funded by the preliminary assets seized from Alistair's fraudulent accounts. And my third act is to announce our new CEO, hired this morning, a woman who has successfully run the port of Antwerp for the last decade, Ms. Helen Shaw." The applause started as a ripple and became a tidal wave. They weren't just clapping for the dividend, they were clapping for the decisiveness, for the end of the circus. Eleonora raised her hand for silence. "This company is not a toy. It is not a piggy bank. It is a legacy. My father's legacy. And as long as I am in this chair, it will be treated with respect. Thank you." She walked off the stage, not to the sound of flashbulbs, but to a standing ovation. She had taken the public humiliation Alistair had dealt her and forged it into a gavel, and she had just brought it down, decisively, on his entire world. 1 month later, Eleonora Hayes stood in the corner office on the 60th floor, the office that had, for so long, been Alistair's. The black leather chairs and chrome desk were gone, replaced with warm woods, comfortable furniture, and a large framed original schematic of her father's first logistics patent. The company was Hayes Sterling Global. The press, once so eager to mock her, now called her the Iron Heiress. The stock, after an initial wobble, had soared. Helen Shaw, the new CEO, was proving to be a ruthless and brilliant operator, and Stephen Chen, now permanent CFO, had rooted out the last vestiges of Alistair's cronyism. There was a soft knock on her door. It was Gregory Taft. "They're here," he said. Eleonora nodded, taking a seat behind her new desk. "Send them in." The doors opened, and 2 men in suits entered. One was Alistair's divorce lawyer. The other was Alistair. He looked terrible. He was out on bail, pending a trial he was certain to lose. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a hollow-eyed, desperate gauntness. He was a king in exile, and he knew it. "Eleonora," he said, his voice raspy. "Mr. Vance," she replied, her tone professional. "Please, sit. This is a bit much, don't you think?" He gestured around the office. "My office. "The company's office," she corrected him. "And I am the company. What do you want? Your lawyer scheduled this meeting as urgent." Alistair's lawyer, a man named Shaw, cleared his throat. "Ms. Hayes, Madam Chairwoman, my client he is prepared to offer a full concession on the divorce. He will make no claim on any assets. In return, he asks that you, as the primary victim and witness in his criminal case, petition the DA for leniency. Perhaps a lesser charge. Probation, not prison." Eleonora looked at Alistair for a long, silent moment. She saw the man she had once, briefly, loved, and she saw the shell that remained. "Leniency," she repeated. "Nora, please," Alistair begged, leaning forward. "Don't do this. Think of the baby. He shouldn't be born with his father in prison. It's not right. What I did, it was a mistake. I was under pressure. You know the pressure I was under." Eleonora placed a hand on her stomach. The baby kicked, as if in response. "The pressure you were under," she said, her voice a dangerous whisper, "was from stealing $300 million to give to your mistress. The pressure was from lying to the board, to your shareholders, and to me, every single day for 2 years. That's not pressure, Alistair. That's a sociopathic lack of character. Please," he whispered. "You ask me to think of my child," Eleonora said, standing up. I am thinking about raising a child in a world where actions have consequences. I am thinking about teaching my son that you do not get to publicly destroy a person, especially the person carrying your child, and then ask for leniency when you get caught." She walked to the door and held it open. "You will make no claim on any assets because you have no assets, Alistair. The penthouse was seized. Your bank accounts are frozen. Your stock options were voided for cause. You have nothing. You are not conceding anything. You are accepting reality." "Eleonora, you can't." "Get out," she said. "Mr. Shaw, if you contact me again with such a pathetic request, I will file for a restraining order. Alistair will face the consequences of his actions, the full consequences." Alistair stared at her, his eyes filled with a hatred that was potent, but powerless. He was led out by his lawyer, a broken man. Eleonora closed the door and let out a breath she felt she had been holding since that night at the gala. It was over. She walked to the great window, looking out over Central Park. The city was hers, the company was hers, the future was hers. She was Eleonora Hayes, the chairwoman of Hayes Sterling Global. She was a mother-to-be. She had been publicly insulted by her husband, and she had taken everything from him. Not out of revenge, she realized, but out of necessity. She had done it to protect her father's legacy and to build a new one for her son. Alistair had tried to make her a footnote in his story. He had no idea she was the author of his. 3 months had passed. The chill of that October boardroom battle had given way to the deep, biting cold of a New York January. The 60th floor corner office at Hayes Sterling Tower was no longer a battleground. It was a command center. Eleonora, now just days from her due date, ran the company with a quiet, decisive authority that had silenced even the most skeptical Wall Street analysts. The Iron Heiress nickname had stuck, but its tone had shifted from mockery to respect. Hayes Sterling Global, under the triumvirate of Eleonora, Beatrice Croft, and the new CEO Helen Shaw, had not only stabilized, but had posted a preliminary quarterly profit that eclipsed any of Alistair's. Eleonora had proven that her father's genius wasn't just in her blood. It was in her strategic mind. She had reinvested the seized funds from the Apex accounts into revolutionary new green logistics, making the company a darling of ESG investors. She had turned Alistair's poison into her company's cure. But the final act of the drama was not taking place in a boardroom. It was taking place in the sterile, imposing confines of the Thurgood Marshall United States Courthouse. The trial of the United States versus Alistair Vance was the hottest ticket in town. It was a slam-dunk case for the prosecution. The paper trail, meticulously organized by Stephen Chen, was irrefutable. The wire transfers, the false invoices, the testimony of a dozen executives who had been bullied or duped by Alistair. It was a mountain of evidence. Alistair's only defense was to attack the witness. His legal team, a high-priced group of sharks paid for by the last dregs of his liquidated personal assets, had one strategy: paint Eleanora Hayes as a woman scorned, a vindictive hormonal wife who had fabricated a corporate conspiracy to punish a philandering husband. "They're going to put her on the stand tomorrow," Gregory Taft advised, meeting Eleanora in her office after a long day of pre-trial motions. "They will be merciless, Eleanora. They will bring up the gala. They will bring up Sabrina. They will try to make you cry." "Let them," Eleanora said, standing and moving to the window. Her large, round belly was a prominent silhouette against the winter skyline. "Do you know what Alistair's true weakness was, Gregory? He believed his own press. He thought he was the smartest man in every room. He believed that my pregnancy made me weak, that my kindness was stupidity. He's still making that same mistake." The next day, the courtroom was packed. Alistair sat at the defendant's table, looking thin and ashen. He refused to look at her. Eleanora Hayes took the stand. She was the picture of calm, maternal power. Alistair's lead attorney, a slick man named Harrison, approached her. "Mrs. Vance? Or do you prefer Ms. Hayes now?" "Ms. Hayes is the name on my birth certificate and on the stock certificates of this company." "It will suffice," she replied, her voice clear and carrying perfectly in the silent room. "Ms. Hayes, is it not true that you discovered these so-called financial irregularities just 2 days after a public and rather embarrassing disagreement with your husband at the Sterling Vance Gala? My husband publicly called me an empty-headed incompetent in front of 300 people," Eleanora stated, not as an accusation, but as a fact. It was not a disagreement. It was a public humiliation. "So you were angry?" Harrison pressed. "I was enlightened," Eleanora countered. "His cruelty was the catalyst I needed to re-examine the man I was married to. When I re-examined the man, I felt it was my fiduciary duty, as the silent majority shareholder, to re-examine the company he was running." "How convenient," Harrison said with a sneer. "And in this re-examination, you, an art historian with no business experience, suddenly uncovered a multi-million-dollar fraud that our client, a man with an MBA from Harvard, had supposedly orchestrated." "Mr. Harrison," Eleanora said, leaning forward slightly, "are you suggesting that one needs an MBA to read a balance sheet? Or are you suggesting that my Vassar education was insufficient? I found the fraud not because I am a scorned wife, but because I was the only person with the authority to look who wasn't on Alistair's payroll. He surrounded himself with yes-men like Robert Denton and sycophants. He never, for 1 second, believed that the decorative wife he married was capable of simple addition." Harrison paced, trying to recover. "And this mistress, Ms. Reed, you found out about her, didn't you? This wasn't about fraud. It was about revenge on the woman who had stolen your husband." The courtroom held its breath. This was the moment. They were expecting tears, a breakdown, a flash of jealous rage. Eleanora Hayes looked past the lawyer, past the judge, and directly at the jury. "Mr. Harrison, I found out about Miss Reed's complicity at 2 o'clock in the morning in a boardroom while reviewing wire transfers with my CFO. Was I hurt? Yes. This man, she gestured to Alistair, didn't just cheat on his wife. He cheated on his partners, his shareholders, and his employees. He stole $300 million from our company, to buy his mistress a penthouse. She folded her hands over her stomach. You are trying to paint this as a crime of passion. You are mistaken. This was a crime of arithmetic. He stole. I am the one who caught him. His affair is a footnote in his depravity. His fraud is the headline. He did not lose his company because he insulted his wife. He lost his company because he was a common thief, one who was arrogant enough to believe I was too stupid to ever count the receipts. Harrison had no more questions. The verdict came 2 days later. Eleonora was not in court. She had, in the early hours of that morning, gone into labor. She was in a private room at Lenox Hill Hospital, the city lights twinkling outside, when Gregory Taft walked in. The room was quiet, save for the soft new sounds of a sleeping infant in her arms. Gregory, she whispered, her face tired but radiant. You're just in time. Gregory, a man not known for emotional displays, found himself smiling, his eyes misty. Eleonora. He's perfect. He's a boy, she said, tracing the baby's tiny hand. A new generation of Hayes, Gregory said softly. He sat in the chair beside her bed. What's the news from downtown? She asked, her gaze never leaving her son. Guilty, Gregory reported. All counts: securities fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy, embezzlement. The judge was... Gregory almost chuckled. He was incensed. He called Alistair a man of profound arrogance and limitless greed who mistook his wife's grace for weakness. Sabrina Reed, having testified against him, received a plea deal for 5 years. For Alistair, the prosecution is recommending 20. He'll be lucky to see daylight in 15. Eleonora nodded slowly, absorbing the finality of it. An entire chapter of her life, a chapter of subjugation and deceit, was finally, irrevocably closed. The man who had tried to erase her was now being erased himself, relegated to a number in a federal prison. It's over, Gregory, she whispered. It's just beginning, Eleonora, he corrected gently. He looked at the baby. Have you chosen a name? I have, Eleonora said. She had thought about it for months. She had considered Arthur after her father. But that was a name of the past, a legacy to be protected. This child was a new legacy, one to be built. He was the first of his line, not the continuation of another's. She looked down at the tiny, perfect face, a new life born from the ashes of the old. He was a Hayes, through and through. He was her son. His name is Arthur, she said, her voice full of a new, different kind of strength. Arthur Hayes. Not Vance. The Vance name ends with his father. The Hayes legacy starts anew, right here. She held her son close, the weight of the company, the trial and the betrayal lifting from her shoulders. She was no longer just the iron heiress or the chairwoman. She was Eleonora Hayes, and she was a mother. The view from the 60th floor was nothing compared to this. What a story of karma and consequences. Alistair Vance thought his wife was just a silent accessory, a pretty prop for his extravagant life. He believed her pregnancy was a weakness he could exploit, and her intellect was something he could mock. He learned, far too late, that in a world of corporate games and hidden legacies, you should never, ever underestimate the person you push into the corner. He publicly insulted his pregnant wife, and in doing so, handed her the very keys to his kingdom. She didn't just get revenge. She got justice. She got the company. What did you think of Eleonora's incredible transformation? Did Alistair get what he deserved? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you loved this story of justice and empowerment, please hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and be sure to subscribe to the channel for more dramatic real-life stories every single week.